Hey y'all, so today we're going to take a minute to talk about tone, both what it is and how you find it. So simply put, tone is just the attitude the writer takes towards the reader, subject, or character. What that means is it's the way that a person writing feels about what it is that they are writing about or who they are writing to. You all understand what tone means when it comes to listening. So the tone of voice that you use, right? Is someone angry? Are they happy? It's the difference in somebody saying, hey, please be quiet, and y'all, shut up, right? Like we can hear tone easily, but it can be difficult to determine sometimes in writing. There's a couple misconceptions about tone that we need to correct. The biggest one being this: tone and mood are not interchangeable. They are not the same thing. So mood is the overall atmosphere or the overall emotion or the atmosphere text evokes. So mood is like that feeling in the room that you get. For example, if you walk in and two people have been fighting, even if they quit arguing, that tension in the room, that's what mood is like. So mood is about the way the audience or the listener or the reader is made to feel. Tone is always about the person speaking or the writer. Okay, that's the biggest difference here. The other misconception that people have about tone is this: that if I'm writing about something negative, I have to be using a negative tone. Sometimes people will make jokes about things that are serious. Even though the content is serious, the tone is not. So it's really important to understand tone, because if you miss what tone is, you might miss the meaning. For example, I'm sure you can all think of someone who fails to understand sarcasm, right? When I don't understand the tone, sometimes I miss the meaning of the text. So how to find tone? There's a really simple method that I like to use every time I'm trying to determine the tone of the passage. The first thing I like to do is this: decide, is the passage positive, negative, or neutral? So what that means is when I read the passage once or twice and I just get a feel for, does this seem like the writer is using a lot of positive words, negative words, or is it somewhere in the middle? Is it informational and doesn't really appear to have a slant? From there, I go back and I read the passage more closely, and I look for particular words, I like to circle them, that lead me to that tone. So these words seem to have a connotation that really sticks out or seem really powerful or noteworthy. From there, what I do is I look at all of those words together and I think, okay, what kind of negative is this? Because there's a big difference between being scary and being sad, or being enthusiastic and being nostalgic, or content. So ways that I use is the way I do this is I look at those words and I say, okay, what is going to be the best adjective to describe them? What is the best word or couple of words to describe that particular tone? And whenever possible, I like to use a tone words list to help. So for example, this wheel here gives you different categories of words you can look like. So if the tone seems angry, I want to pick a more specific word. Is it aggressive or is it hostile? If it's sad, is it depressed or is it vulnerable? So on and so forth. And there's a ton of different tone wheels you can use. You can make a copy of this one. You can Google tone wheels. I'll attach one below with this lesson. So let's take a look at an example. So this is an excerpt from Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. So bad. So it says, the Baudelaire orphans went to the bedroom and glumly packed their few belongings. Claus looked distastefully at each ugly shirt Mrs. Poe had bought for him as he folded them and put them into a small suitcase. Violet looked around the living room, the cramped, smelly room in which they had been living, and Sunny crawled around, solemnly biting each of Edgar and Albert's shoes and leaving small teeth marks in each one so that she would not be forgotten. So as soon as I read that passage, it seems very negative. I notice a lot of negative words. So what I would do is I would take a minute and I go back and, okay, what words stick out to me? Orphans, glumly, few, distastefully. What else? Ugly, smelly, cramped, solemnly, forgotten. And when I listen to those words and when I look at those words I've circled and highlighted, this doesn't seem to me, seems negative, but it's not angry. It's almost solemn or depressed or resigned, right? A word that means sad, but understanding that it has to be what it is. Versus, take a look at this second example. This is from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. It says, There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from the smaller ghetto to the larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. This is a great example of how talking about negative things isn't always a super negative tone. So when I read this, my first thought is, okay, this definitely isn't positive. I know I'm not looking for a positive tone word, but I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the words that stick out to me. So I see this repeated over and over again. When will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied. We can never be satisfied. So when I see that phrase, we can never be satisfied, it sounds to me determined, right? Or powerfully stated. So I noticed that, but then I also noticed unspeakable horrors, police brutality, heavy, fatigue, mobility, ghetto, stripped, robbed. And I notice all of those words are negative, and they're clearly highlighting something negative and terrible, but not in a way that seems defeated. They're all very strong, powerful words. So when I think about the tone here, even though the content is abuse and a lack of rights, rather than saying resigned, like the previous passage did, where it was accepting, this seems like the opposite. This seems like the speaker is pointing out with force all of these things. So when I go back and I think about what kind of tone that this might be, disgusted by the situation, yes, that could be part of it, but not just that. Also, in some ways, let's see here what else might work. Frustrated, yes. What else would you use? Frustrated, disrespected, but then also powerful, energetic, determined. So it's not so much a matter of what the text itself says, it's how the speaker says it. So remember, is the passage positive or negative or neutral? What are the words that point you there? And overall, what is the best word? So the big picture takeaway is, how do we find tone? We examine the diction. We look at the denotation and the connotation, and we remember that diction leads us to tone, the author's attitude, and that ultimately the author's attitude will always help lead us to purpose.